On this edition of In the Gun, we take a deep dive look at the WVU defense. What are the Mountaineers going to look like on the defensive side of the football? Who are the key personnel that you need to be keeping an eye on? We'll discuss all of that and more on this edition of ITG.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
Single. I've got the best teammates in the business here, all right?
No way!
They both played the game. They both know the game. Owen is the runaway beer truck, known for having some fun.
Owen Schmidt, like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Jed is the signal caller, who is the X's and O's and the brainiac.
First of all, Jed's research is pretty impressive.
So we've combined those two skill sets.
Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 180 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I'm Wesley Euler, joined by the signal caller here on this edition of In the Gun. And you already know, this episode of ITG brought to you in part by our friends at Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics, from baseball to Formula One racing, anything you want to get in on. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. And when the game's over, you can head over to their online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. So head to the website today to sign up and get in on the action, and make sure you use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% free bet credit on your first deposit of up to $250. That's at BetOnline. The game starts here. And Jed, we started ITG episode 179, previous episode to this one, previewing the WVU offense. A lot of conversation there, of course, about the offensive side of the football, Garrett Green and company. This is probably another good time for me as well, too, to plug the special edition episodes that we did earlier in the summer on Garrett Green the runner, Garrett Green the passer, if you're looking for a more in-depth breakdown of the Mountaineers' current signal caller. But now, of course, with the signal caller, we need to take a look at the defensive side of the football. Jed, I mean, I understand it, right? Garrett Green and that offense, they have been demanding a lot of the offseason attention, but quite often as it goes in high-level football, in the Big 12 as well, too, where there are a lot of talented offenses around the league, you got to have some semblance of a defense if you want to be able to be playing important games in November and, hopefully ultimately get to that Big 12 championship game in December.
Yeah, you sure do. And in the spirit of continuing with the plugs, two more. Recently, you did a great report updating how camp's gone for Beanie Bishop. You're right there in Latrobe with the Steelers, how camp's gone for Zach Frazier. So I encourage people to jump on and check out your update on the two former Mountaineers at Steelers camp. And then speaking of West Virginia's defense, it wasn't all that long ago in July that you and I had a chance to sit down with Cody Alexander, former Big 12 staffer on the old Baylor staff. And Cody really dives deep into the X's and O's of what Jordan Lesley is doing defensively at West Virginia with that East Coast 3-4 that we've adopted starting last year and moving into this year. So I encourage people to take a look at the episode where Cody paid us a visit in July. Was it 4 or 5 episodes ago now? But those are two more that you might want to check out. But yeah, let's start with this, Wes. Part of my off-season lift is when I put together what I call our media kit, this Hammurabi code-sized book that I email to you guys, right? The War and Peace of WVU football and Big 12 football.
It's about as many chapters as the Bible last time I checked.
That's right, yeah. So let me dust this off and see if I can lift up and check out chapter 4 here. Let's go to Leviticus here. One of the things I'm looking at, I put together a formula. And these are the types of things when I'm sitting there watching Mountaineer basketball on ESPN Plus in February, right? I mean, I can't just do one thing at a time. I have to multitask. That's just the nature of my busy-minded nonsense. So I put together a formula, if you want to call it that. And I was just curious, okay, if you were to consider statistical categories or categories of different metrics, whether it's rush defense, rush offense, yards per carry, penalties, whatever it might be, In the last 5 years, the last 5 Big 12 champions, which of these statistical categories have carried the day for those 5 champions more than any other of the statistical categories? So I have nearly 40 categories that I looked at statistically. So it goes pretty deep in terms of what I wanted to buff out and consider. And when you look at the top of the list, the last 5 Big 12 champions, last year Texas, the year before that Kansas State, going back to Baylor in 21, and then of course Oklahoma had back-to-back titles in 19 and 20. So those are your last 5 Big 12 champions. When you look at the highest average in key categories, if it makes sense what I'm saying, the categories that surface the most with recent Big 12 champions, starting with number 1, third down defense. That was the strongest of all indicators, statistically, of a Big 12 championship football team. If you excelled in third down defense, you are really in the thick of things, more so than any other statistical category. Third down defense. Here is where the last 5 Big 12 teams ranked in third down defense, West. First, third, second. I mean, nobody's lower than third. So then the third most common, number 2, was QBR rating for your starting quarterback. That's no big surprise,
Makes
right?
sense. Yep.
But then the third most compelling indicator of a Big 12 champion in recent times was rush defense. Makes sense. You got to win at home, but you also got to steal some on the road. They always say run defense travels well. So those 5 teams also played exceptional run defense, and then you get into sacks per game and things like that. But in another episode, we'll flesh out what's on the rest of this list. It's kind of interesting to take a look at it. But the reason that I wanted to start off with those couple, when you look at where West Virginia fared defensively last year, starting with number 1, third down defense, we improved in a lot of key areas last year. Third down defense, we were 5th in the conference, allowing about 39% success rate. That number can stand to improve, especially West. And you'll hear us talk about this later when we get into the turnover portion of the show too, the takeaway portion. When you lead the conference in sacks, like West Virginia did last year for the first time since joining the Big 12, you like to think you're knocking the other offense off schedule enough that you're going to have a little more success on third down than 5th place in your league. 5th place isn't bad, but when you lead the league in sacks, you'd like to think you can make more hay than that. Sure. And then when you look at rush defense, another category, everybody thinks of the Ollie Gordon moments in the 4th quarter. Well, those were the exception, not the rule, Wes. They really were. Overall, West Virginia was relatively consistent against the run, finishing 4th in the Big 12. But once again, our first year transitioning into a new scheme, into a 3-4, we're going to talk about how the personnel we have fits that, how we spent the offseason, more specifically in pursuit of things tailored to fit this individual or specific scheme. So those are the things I wanted to talk about. When you're talking about building a championship football team in this conference, what's that pedigree look like? Well, since we're talking about the defensive side of the football, it has to start there. It has to start with winning on third down, getting teams off the field on third down, and it has to start also with stopping the run and making the other offense somewhat one-dimensional.
Yeah, I mean, benchmarks of any good defense at any level, I think, especially in the Big 12 conference, especially as you lay it out there where the best teams in the league usually rank statistically in those categories. But I mean, if you're coaching high school football, right? If you're in an NFL training camp right now, you're talking about these same things. You're talking about third down defense. You're talking about rush defense. You're probably shortly after talking about red zone defense as well, too, right? I'm sure we'll get into that at some point, being able to hold teams to 3s instead of 7s when you get down there into the shadow of your own end zone. And, of course, turnovers, hunting the football. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, that's the foundation, right, of any good defense. That's where you have to start.
Guess what's almost all the way at the bottom of the list at number 38 in terms of importance for these last 5 Big 12 champions? It's a little surprising, but if you think it through, not really. Pass defense.
Pass defense. Yeah, that would have been
now,
my guess.
Why would that be? What do championship teams do? They play with a lot of leads. And when you got the lead, the other team's going to be playing pitch
Other
and catch
teams throwing
against
the
you. So
football.
some
Sure.
of those are hollow carbs or hollow calories, I should say, right?
And
so,
that probably relates to some
yeah.
of the rush defense stuff too, right? Because the best
Absolutely.
teams, they've got the
Absolutely.
lead. You're not defending the run as much either. Yeah.
Without question.
Yeah.
It's not mutually exclusive. So those are the types of things you want to build towards. Now that you know the goal, well, we're gonna start talking about some of the personnel that we have, some of the acquisitions we've made in the offseason, some of the things we're trying to do schematically to slow down and in some cases stop these Big 12 offenses and compete and challenge for a spot in Jerry World in December. This is where it all starts. Winning on third down, on transition downs, and stopping the run and trying to make teams one-dimensional. Then you get into sacks per game, pressuring the passer, which we were very good at it. We'll talk about all that, but I kind of just want to establish the terms as we head into this.
Yeah, no, well said. And that's I think that's a good scene setter there from the signal caller as we thank our friends at Toothman Ford as well. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Big shout out to our guy JR and everybody there at Team Toothman. What do you say we take a little break here, Jed? Come back. Personnel on the other side. We will continue to take, again, a deep dive. We were kind of being tongue-in-cheek, but also serious. I mean, Jed's got like 126-page, 123-page media kit over there, so there is plenty to get to as it relates to this 2024 edition of the WVU Defense. We'll break all of that down when we return on the other side. You are in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
ITG will be right back.
The Mountaineers took it out of his hands, and Darwin Cook is racing for a touchdown. How about that turnaround?
You work the land, you just got to be a jack of all trades type. There's just too much to do. So if you got to be a welder or a farmer or a ditch digger, that's just who you are that day. Then tomorrow, you can be somebody else.
Get your Coyote at the new location of Johnston Equipment between Weston and Buchanan.
In year two of anything that you do, you're obviously going to expand on it a little bit. However much your kids can handle is however much you will expand on it. I think we're pretty close to the same. We've done some things. I think that the big difference in our group last year is we worked really hard at being good at football, tackling, shedding blocks, angles to the football, force and overlap angles, and we worked extremely hard on that. And I know y'all have heard me say this, made that mistake in 22, and I'll never do it again. So we're a little further along in some areas. Some areas we don't think we need to, but we've continued to expand the way that we work on being good at playing football. And I think that was the biggest difference last year, and I think it'll continue to be the difference in how our defense plays. And I think the difference this year is I don't think you're hamstringed to one. These are our guys. We're going to be a little more rotational, I think, with being deeper, so that if there's a performance lapse in a quarter and a half or in a game, we're kind of going to be next guy up, as opposed to having to wait till the next game to make changes.
Back in the gun here as it's time to continue to comb through the WVU defense as we continue our kind of August rollout here of a lot of bigger picture season preview type episodes. This one focusing on the WVU defense. And Jed, as it quite often goes, right? I mean, it starts up front. We could talk about this on the offensive side of the football. We talk about this on the defensive side of the football. If you're not winning in the trenches, you're probably not going to be winning very often on the scoreboard. So if it's all right with you, I say we start up front here with the big guys as we break down this defensive personnel.
I think that's a great idea. And I think this is the one unit on this side of the football, this defensive line group at large that kind of surprised the most people last year. People didn't know what we were going to have outside of a couple spots heading into last season. And the next thing you know, you look up and we're sometimes rolling 7, 8, or even more bodies in and out without missing a lot of production. Hats off to Coach Jackson for having the absolute sweet spot. He has his finger on the pulse of that sweet spot in terms of divvying up these reps in this group. Now, the question is, can we go 7, 8, or more deep this year? I think everybody's comfortable with the starting 3. And when you project that out, Sean Martin, the size, the experience, what he brings from a leadership standpoint.
The previous play, they took my sack away.
I expect him to play his best football this year from that defensive end spot. Fatorma Malba, he has quietly but consistently and steadily really stepped into what you hoped he might be when he arrived from Penn State. He is a stable, consistent force on the interior at that nose spot. He's the type of big-bodied kid who can eat up space, force double teams, and in an odd front configuration defensively, that's what you're going to ask out of those big-bodied interior nose guards, nose tackles. So, and then when you look at the defensive tackle spot, the boundary tackle spot, Eddie V. When you look at Eddie Vesterinen, I can't say enough about Eddie V. I mean, this is a guy whose motor absolutely has no off switch. This is the last guy that an exhausted offensive lineman wants to be dealing with in the early minutes of the fourth quarter. I mean, he does not slow down. He won't. I mean, it's like blender speed and then Hounds of the Baskerville speed. I mean, there's no slowing down with Eddie V. So he really is the ultimate overachiever. When the game that he had against Texas Tech last year in Morgantown from that boundary tackle spot with those, just how disruptive he was making tackles from that position, that's supremely difficult to do what he was doing. So now it becomes a function of we're satisfied with those 3 or what we think those 3 project to be. So now let's get into some of the depth. And we talked about the transition from an even front configuration. First of all, as we talked about with Cody Alexander, everybody today is multiple, some version of a 3 and 4 down configuration. But the question is, what's your base defense? And as we've transitioned into more of an odd front base, you want to recruit skill sets that fit that type of scheme. And when I look at TJ Jackson from Troy, that is exactly what I see. TJ Jackson is a twitchy kid with some size to him. He can be a one-gap disruptor. He's incredibly versatile.
He's just in the middle of the defense, and he's just trying to.
He's a guy you can move around, so he is going to be prominently in the mix. Hammond Russell is another guy on the interior, a guy with some girth, a guy with some size. He's going to give us a lot of quality reps at that nose spot. And think about it, even if you can just pitch in or contribute 10, 15 reps a game, and you can find yourself with these 300-pounders going 3 deep at that spot, that's really going to put you in a position to have some success. And then moving on over, Asani Redwood, he's had some injury history. We've always known the upside of what Asani's game could bring. It's just a function of getting healthy, getting the experience under his wings, and then letting him just run with it, because I think he's an incredibly talented kid as well at that defensive tackle spot. One of the things that I asked you to do, and we'll get to yours after a bit, we're going to get to mine right now, is pick a true freshman that you might think is in position to contribute possibly right away or at least fairly soon. On the defensive side of the football, we did the same thing on the offensive side of the football in the last episode. So that's where I want to get into. There's 3 names, and I'm going to settle on one. But when you look at Elijah Kinsler on that defensive line as a true freshman, when you look at Zachariah Keith, Nate Gabriel, they step in with these advanced body types like they're already juniors in college.
I'm looking for a bigger profile player as we move forward.
Nate Gabriel and him holding up, especially in these quality practice reps against a very battle-tested and experienced West Virginia interior offensive line. I think Nate Gabriel, 6'3", 315. I can't even imagine after an off season or two what's going to happen with Mike Joseph and what Nate Gabriel is going to end up looking like. But I think even right out of the gates, that's a guy, Nate Gabriel, that stands to be in position to contribute to this defensive line rotation at that nose tackle position. He has the size, he has the natural strength, he's country strong, and he's just disruptive enough to demand some attention, which translates sometimes on the interior to some double teams. So I think those three could all find some role, but I'm going to stick with Nate Gabriel. And again, we talked about in the opening segment, Wes, last year for the first time since joining the Big 12 in 2012, we led the league in sacks. So if you want to continue down that path, they're going to have to play a prominent role by demanding some of these double teams we're talking about, freeing up the path of least resistance for second level linebackers to spill through. And that's the only way that you're going to find downstream of that potentially some turnovers. Last year were the most turnovers forced by a West Virginia defense since Neil Brown arrived with 16. Mm-hmm. That's the most West Virginia's had, but it's still ranked in the lower half of the league. Once again, these are the types of things that when you dial up that level of pressure and you consistently assail the quarterback like we did last year, you have to think if you keep the pedal down on that, eventually you're going to start winning more on third down, and downstream from that are going to be turnovers. Wes, do you know the last time West Virginia led its conference in turnover margin? You want to put yourself in Jerry World in December? Try doing that. We talked about in the last episode the ball security that the offense demonstrated a year ago. If they can continue that, and if the defense can find a way to steal some more turnovers, the last time West Virginia led the conference, 2008, not far off in the Big East, 2008. So it's been 16 years since West Virginia led its given conference in turnover margin. If this pass rush, spearheaded by this defensive line demanding double teams and wreaking havoc at the point of attack, clearing things up for the linebackers and the DBs on the second and third levels, if we can do that and that translates into production in the form of turnovers, that is a path to Jerry World right there. That is how you build a championship pedigree defense right there. But it has to start necessarily with this defensive line and holding up, as we showed flashes of doing last year against the run. If you win more consistently on third down and you're elite, if you're truly elite, if you're among the league leaders in third down success defensively, you don't need a whole lot of depth on the defensive line. You need depth on the defensive line when teams are stringing together 10 and 12 play drives against you. And the only way they can string together 10 and 12 play drives is by winning 2, 3, 4 times on third down. If you don't allow them to do that, you don't necessarily need as much depth. And the depth all of a sudden becomes a luxury instead of a necessity. That's kind of how I see big picture, the defensive line, the personnel, and how things might fit in year two of this West Virginia base configuration of a 3-4 defense.
Yeah, and I think year one was a good starting point, right? And so many of those things you just touched on seem similar to last year. This was a group that was able to stay fresh down the stretch. You think of how many times, I mean, in the end of games that they had to lean on that defense in key situations. And I think a big part of that was that rotation they had that began up front. I know, I'm sure you remember the statistic, but what was it against TCU? Like, gave up 1 yard of offense in the third quarter or something after giving up 200 some in the first half, I think, right?
Yes.
I mean, those are the type of things that this defensive front can do when they are dialed in and completely flip a game on its head like that. That's encouraging that it feels like we might have the same formula this year.
Couple of turnover numbers for you, and of course it bears in this conversation the loss of Corey McIntyre, because he was in such a great place, his development in the spring. So that's why the emergence of some of this youth is all the more critical to provide some of that depth that we're talking about when you lose a critical body heading into the season that we did in the spring with Corey. But here's a couple flash numbers for you on the turnover front. When West Virginia under Neil Brown wins the turnover margin in general, when we win it at all, we're 14-2. When we win it at home, remember this, I'll talk about this Penn State week. When we win the turnover margin at home, we're 9-0. when we go +2 in turnover margin overall under Neil Brown, we're 10-0. Yes, this translates to success, and it all has to start at the point of attack by being dominant and disruptive from this defensive line, allowing you to get creative on the second and third level.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about that second and third level in just a minute, but first, a thank you to our friends at Fortis and our guy Rick Lewis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. Jed, as we move to the second level, wow, this is exciting. I mean, as somebody who grew up in Western Pennsylvania, right, where linebacker lineage is looked upon like it's, you know, a succession plan, right? When you have all the Hall of Fame linebackers and all pro and defensive player of the year linebackers that have played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, you grow up having an affinity for that position. And that was certainly the time. I mean, I was spoiled when I was in college at WVU as well. You know, that was the J.T. Thomas and Najee Good and Anthony Leonard and David Long when I was in school. I mean, we had some really good ones. Man, sure this group that they have in the second level, starting to feel like some of those old glory days of Mountaineer defenses once again. There are some dudes playing linebacker and in that second level for this defense.
I think it's a unique combination of guys that have the potential to play at the next level mixed in with some Casey Vance type guys. And that's what you always want. That's what you always want. Football. Yeah. That is the signature of a high potential linebacker group for West Virginia. So first, again, let's define the terms. We're going to start the conversation when I say linebacker. In this scheme, it can mean a host of different things.
Also, real quick. I also didn't say Reed Williams, didn't say Nick Kwiatkowski from my time as well, too. All right. So just in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, man, you should have mentioned those two. You should have mentioned those two. You should have mentioned those two. Well, now I did.
There you go. A second contract guy, Fiesta Bowl MVP guy.
Yeah, Fiesta Bowl MVP and a guy who played, 7 years in the NFL. Not too shabby.
That's right. So let's first start the conversation with the Mike and the Will. I should have pulled a small grease board up here for those watching on YouTube and quickly identify what we're talking about here. But another part of the conversation we had with Cody Alexander. 3-4 can mean a lot of things for a lot of people, but at the end of the day, it basically means you're going to have 3 people or 3 defenders in a defensive line posture and 4 second level players lined up in somewhat of a traditional linebacker spot. Now, you don't get more traditional than box linebackers. And in this 3-4, your box linebackers on the interior are going to be your Mike to the strong side of the formation and your Will to the weak side of the formation. Sometimes their run fits are interchangeable depending on what scheme you're deploying. So that's why you're able to cross-train these kids. Now, we're going to talk about 5 names here, but that's why you're able to cross-train these types of guys and give you a certain element of versatility in this room. The Wills can often play Mike, the Mike can often play Will, and vice versa. So obviously, we're going to start with Trey Lathan. Trey Lathan at the Mike position. 4.5 games in the last year, we all know what happened. He fractured his tibia and fibula against TCU. We repaired it with a rod and 4 screws. The best news I heard in the spring was him telling us I've been able to pick up where I left off. Because Wes, where he left off, he played 4.5 games. At some point, I have in my notes here the snap count that he actually played for the season. In 4.5 games, he had 8 quarterback hits, which tied for number 3 all season in the Big 12. In 4.5 games, he was really starting to develop that feel of syncing up and timing up the opposing offense's snap count, their cadence. He has that knack as a downhill blitzer, and he was becoming such an asset for us. And from a versatility standpoint, you've heard some of the defensive staff talk about the fact, whether it's Jeff Coons, the linebacker coach, Jordan Lesley, defensive coordinator. Look, if teams try and go big on us, and by big, we might mean 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends. We might mean 21 personnel, more traditional pro personnel. 2 running backs, one of them being some sort of fullback body type or heavy H-back body type, and 1 tight end. If teams try and do that to us, Instead of having a hybrid defensive back out at spear to the wide side of the field, Trey Lathan's the kind of guy who's just athletic enough that he can occupy enough space that you can trust him and you can stay heavy defensively as a counterpoint. And that kind of versatility says a lot. Now, let's explain this a bit further so people understand the difference. You have, for instance, we're going to get into some of the bandit body types, some of the spur body types with Tyron Bradley, 260 pounds. That's not the kind of guy you want playing in space to the wide side of the field. But Trey Lathan, in limited spurts, yeah, he's athletic enough to hold his own. He's going to be more difficult to game plan against and try and pick on in the pass game. So without changing personnel necessarily, you can all of a sudden kick Aubrey Burks from spear back to the safety spot, playing high, kick out Trey Lathan, step one of these other micro body types into the box, and you're good to go against 21 or 12 personnel. So when we talk about versatility and you hear the defensive staff speak to that, that's what they're talking about. So that's what Trey Lathan can give you. Knock on wood, he stays healthy. I can't wait to see what he does in a full season as a healthy backer, because the light really came on for him late last summer, even early in camp last year. Now let's go to Caden Bizer.
Yeah,
another guy.
I mean, that would be exciting on its own, right? But wait, there's more.
That's right, yeah. We got four more. Caden Bizer, of course, West Virginia kid, a heavy special teams contributor, 180 plus snaps on special teams. In other words, he earned his reps defensively the old-fashioned way, through the transition units, through the respect of his teammates in the locker room, through coverage units, grinding that out. He's appeared in 24 games in his career. He had a great bowl game against North Carolina, which was the kind of a springboard into a great offseason. And Neil Brown says he is in the mix for most improved player for us this offseason. He's faster, he's quicker, he's seeing things more efficiently, diagnosing plays offensively, and he's improved his pass defense skills. That's another area that he wanted to work on, and he's successfully done so. And I'm not just saying that because I played with his dad, and his dad's a buddy of mine. I mean, he has really taken a step this offseason, no doubt about it. Moving on to Reed Carrico. Reed Carrico, and this is part of what I talked about a couple episodes ago when camp started with. I broke down this linebacker group, and one of the concerns, before I jump into Reed, one of the concerns going into this group in general, or looking at it big picture, was the lack of experience in this room. Now, that's a fair point, because when you look at them collectively, they only have 13 career starts. 7 of those were made out of necessity by a true freshman and Ben Cutter last year. And then you had a combination of 6 starts made by Trey Lathan and Caden Bizer. So only 13 starts in this room. Just seems like more, right? But it's only 13. But Wes, here's some perspective for you. Let's go back to 2 years ago. Entering the season, this Mike and Will group, guess how many combined starts they had then? 12. And all 12 were by Lee Koba. He was the only guy with any starting experience. So we were less experienced last year. Let's continue back. Our Mike and Will group entered the season with 4 combined starts. So for quite some time, we've become accustomed to entering seasons with these Mike and Will groups without a lot of experience. You had to find the last time that our Mike and Will group entered the season with a lot of experience. You had to go all the way back to 2020. When you had Dylan Tonkery, Josh Chandler-Samito, X-Ree Lowe, that group entered the season with 34 starts. So it's not unusual for West Virginia in recent years to enter the season without a lot of starting experience. We'd like to have more, but it is what it is. Jumping back into the personnel, Reed Carrico, of course, the transfer from Ohio State. Let's go back to when he was recruited just a handful of years ago. The number 4 rated player in Ohio and a consensus 4-star prospect. The nation's fifth ranked linebacker prospect coming out of Ironton High School. That's what Reed Carrico was, the 5th ranked linebacker prospect in the country. Now at Ohio State, he played behind a senior heavy linebacker group, especially in 2023, his last year in Columbus. That group of Buckeyes had seniors Steele Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg, Cody Simon. So they were a very long in the tooth group. So it was just difficult for him under any circumstances to work his way in. But an Ironton, Ohio kid is about as close as you can get to a kid being from the state of Ohio and being from the mountains of West Virginia culturally. I mean, that blue collar mentality that Ironton program is built on, fits hand in glove. He's a mature kid, so he's going to bring a lot of experience. His fourth year of college football, he can run. He's physical. Some of the things I saw him do in a practice setting in the spring, West, got me really excited. I think of some short yardage and goal line circumstances where I saw him really light some people up and make some plays and diagnose things. He has that natural instinct in those short yardage situations. Now, this is obviously a different scheme than what he became used to at Ohio State, but I'll double back to some of what I talked about in that episode for camp opening. Even though he wasn't playing, being around that kind of greatness day in, day out, like I talked about when I played at West Virginia, I wasn't on the field, but playing against those types of players, Leroy Axum, Whitmore, on down the line, that makes you better. Well, that's exactly what Reed Carrico has been doing at Ohio State. I think this is a quality addition to this room.
Jed, success leaves clues.
Success leaves clues, absolutely. Great way of putting it. I think he brings a lot of value to this room. I think he brings some experience to this room, just being around the game as long as he has. And I think he's going to find a way to contribute, both between the lines, outside the lines. Now, let's jump to the Will Backer spot. This is where I really start to get excited. When I look at Josiah Trotter, first of all, what he was starting to do before the injury last spring, all the indications are there. I remember watching his high school tape and just frothing at the mouth before our recruiting show. I mean, that's high-level high school football at St. Joseph's Prep in Philadelphia.
One of the best programs
that's some of the best high school football in the country. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. This is why Neil Brown says this kid plays the game the right way. He has imposing size. He's 6'2", pushing 240. He's incredibly instinctive. And Jeff Coons, his position coach, makes a good point. He's like, look, he might not have played a lot of college football yet. As a matter of fact, he doesn't have a single snap under his belt. But he's played a lot of football in general for good teams that went deep into the playoffs against other good teams. That's a lot of experience and a lot of reps finding the football and mastering the nuances of the linebacker position. So he is an experienced kid from that standpoint. This kid always goes full speed. He never makes the same mistake twice. That's one of the things the coaching staff loves about him. He races it, he fixes it, and he moves on. He stays engaged always. Like after the injury last year, Jeff talked about giving him certain assignments from a film study standpoint. He would dive right in and embrace it, hug it, grow from it. And then we haven't even gone into the pedigree yet. I mean, he's got a brother from Clemson who's in the NFL. His dad, we all know about Jeremiah Trotter and what a dominant fixture he was in the NFL for so many years.
Nasty linebacker. If you don't, just go to YouTube and Google Jeremiah Trotter, and you'll enjoy a highlight package. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't see any reason to believe we're not getting a high impact football player almost out of the gate. Now, some of the things that I'll see in practice are still what you might expect with the speed of the power forward game. Maybe he's a half step off on his angle once in a while on a stretch play, and Jaheim bounces it outside. But I'm telling you right now, late September, early October, those are the types of things that will be rectified because there aren't many holes in this kid's game. Once it starts to slow down for him at this level even more, I really, really think we're going to have a high velocity, high impact player. He has all the makings and all the earmarks and hallmarks of playing at the next level for a lot of years. So I think he's something Mountaineer fans should be excited about. And that's the starting spot at the Will Backer. Now when you get into the backup
just
spot.
real quick, Jed, real quick.
Please.
If you were to ask me, and this is just off the top of my head without a ton of thought into it, right? Yeah. But if you were just to put me on the spot and say, hey, Wes, rank the Mountaineers right now on this roster for in terms of you think their pro potential in the NFL one day. Wyatt Milam's number one. I mean, he's going to be, barring something unforeseen, he's going to be a first-round draft pick in the NFL draft, 10 months from now. Trotter might be number two, legitimately, if I was making a list of pro potential guys on this roster.
Potential. There you go. I mean, we're going to use the P word with him a lot, but I think it's only going to be for 6 or 8 weeks, and then we'll no longer have to use the P word, right?
And everyone's going to be talking about him. Yeah,
that's right. So that's the case with our starting Will linebacker and Josiah Trotter. So now let's go to our, and I don't even know how much backup and starter means in this context, because all 5 of these kids are going to get significant reps. Ben Cutter, a guy who really stepped into duty, baptism under fire with the injuries that we suffered at that spot last year. his 7 starts were stitched of necessity, no doubt about it. And he had some growing pains. In his 11 games, he logged over 460 snaps. The true freshman played a lot of special teams. Those growing pains stood out sometimes against some competition more than others, like from a run defender standpoint. I think of the Cincinnati game, the Houston game, the Oklahoma game, but the Oklahoma game could be said about so many on this team. But when I look at his biggest deficiency perhaps last year was from a pass defense standpoint. It got to the point he was targeted 21 times to give up 19 catches. And Wes, it got from a film study standpoint, later in the year, especially as teams got more tape on him, I very much got the sense that they started to game plan and create matchups to target him. I saw some of that at a BYU. I saw some of that at a Cincinnati late in the year. Even in the regular season finale, I saw some of that at Baylor. Now, the good news is Ben had a great offseason, physically and mentally. Physically, got more flexible, got a lot stronger. So he has more burst, more punch. He's more athletic. His ability in pass coverage has improved drastically. Now, a big part of that is, yes, the athleticism, but also seeing the bigger picture of what the offense is trying to do to you, a better understanding of route combinations. In other words, now once you start to see the boundary slot doing one thing, after enough reps, you can start to project what's coming in behind you, backside from the wide side of the formation. So as a true freshman, that's harder to do. So this offseason, that's part of what he's worked on, better technique, better job of confronting blockers, using his footwork to help shed those guys. When you're his size and you're trying to shed the block of a 300-pound plus offensive lineman, it takes technique. You have to be a technician. He's gotten better at that. And when you listen to him talk, what's obvious, Wes, is he's now starting to see the big picture of what we're trying to do defensively. That matters as much as anything else. I love the fact that he considers himself a quote-unquote low 3-star. It's kind of put a chip on his shoulder. He regards himself as perhaps one of the lower recruited kids in that class. Anything to put a chip on your shoulder. So I think we're going to get the best of Ben Cutter. We're going to get an improved Ben Cutter. He understood the deficiencies that he suffered last year, forced into duty probably prematurely, and he's worked to address those. So rounding out this group of 5, I think Ben Cutter is going to bring a lot of value. He's going to continue to help on the transition units and contribute there. So this room is going to play as big a role as any. And that's when you talk about the Mike and the Will spots. And now we're going to segue a bit, Wes, into the edge spots, the spur, and then even the spear. And I think you're going to have a freshman pick for us somewhere in this conversation as well.
That's where my freshman pick will be. But yeah, just I'd round out what you just said there with, again, when you lost Trotter before you even kicked the ball off in Happy Valley last season, and then you lose Trey Lathan a quarter into the season. I mean, you went from being very excited about that position to being bare bones and having to, thrust a true freshman into Ben Cutter into a prominent role. Hopefully the payoff for that comes now, though, right? That trial by fire happened, and now from a position that you thought you were really thin and just trying to do enough to survive and get by, to now one that turns into a position of strength. So that's exciting.
I like what the staff did. A closing remark about Ben Cutter. They learned the limitations of the freshman linebacker. He was starting to see a lot of fog in his run fits, and they simplified that. They stopped chopping the front up quite as much in front of him to simplify things, so it was more of a steady fixture in terms of what he was seeing with his fit, and down the stretch it helped him be more productive. But moving to the outside again, if you want to visualize the look of this 3-4 defense, the 3 down linemen, the 2 inside backers, which we just discussed, the Mike and the Will. Now we're going to go to the 2 outside spots. This is where it starts to get interesting because they work into different hybrid worlds with different body types.
Yes.
The edge spot. This is more of your traditional edge rusher. We're not going to ask our edge rushers to step to the wide side of the field over top of the slot with all that space. Instead, they're typically, unless the ball's in the middle of the field, they're going to be to the boundary. They're going to be to the short side. If the ball's in the left hash, they're going to be on that side of the formation, defending the offense. So let's talk about Tyron Bradley. What an incredible bowl game he had. We all remember the athletic pick. He is he's sneaky athletic. He really is. He was recruited at Abilene Christian as an edge rusher. He was a high school quarterback and defensive end in Texas. He's a very athletic 257 pounds. People forget that, yes, Ty French, his counterpart in this room, gets all the hype and all the headlines for being the explosive edge guy with the 30-plus sacks at Gardner-Webb. But Tyron Bradley's last year at Abilene Christian, he had 32 quarterback hurries that year alone. So when he picks his spots, he can be highly productive as an edge rusher as well. But this is where you get into the difference in terms of what you're asking these guys to do. You're going to ask them to set the edge against the run and rush the passer. You're not going to ask them to cover a lot of space against athletic frisbee chasing dogs playing the spot, these athletic wiggle kind of guys. You're not going to ask them to do that. So here's some numbers for you to lend some context to this. Defensively, a year ago, Tyron Bradley played 327 snaps. 52 of those were over the slot. So 1 out of every 6 of his snaps was over the slot. But again, visualize this. When I say over the slot, that means the slot to the short side of the field. So even if he's dropping into zone coverage, you're not asking him to cover a lot of space. It's not like to the other side of the field where you're going to have your hybrid safety that we'll talk about with a spear here in a minute. Much different assignment, much different role to the enclosed short side of the field. So that's where this comes in. But again, Tyron Bradley, his best game was probably against North Carolina. Very sneaky, athletic former quarterback, recruited as an edge rusher at the FCS level. And when you listen to his position coach, Coach Vic Cabral, he wants to be great. That's what he says of Tyron. And this is kind of a leader in this room. So he's now one of the voice of reasons, the voice of experience. He knows the defense inside and out, so he brings tremendous value. Now when you move into Ty French, you talk more about the specialty element of different things you can do with these types of positions in this 3-4 configuration. Ty French was a very coveted portal acquisition from the FCS level, 235-ish pounds, played a lot of football at Gardner-Webb, pure production, 30-plus sacks. He was 4-time all-conference, has a motor on him, very high energy. He loves football, but he's the type of kid that if it's 3rd and 8, you don't want to see him come from the boundary of the opposing offense. You really don't. And there might even be times, if you want to get creative, if in fact that's all you're going to ask him to do, just imagine a proposition, Wes, where you have both Tyron Bradley and Ty French on the field at the same time in a 3rd and long situation.
Yeah.
Because again, if you're asking them to do limited things and just peel it back and either drop to a short boundary or bring it from the edge of the field, as long as you're not asking them to cover too much space, that's where you can start to get creative with these body types. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. And if you want to transition, Wes, we're going to move the conversation to the wider side of the field and the other outside defender, that being the spear position. And whereas the spur position, the old bandit, is more of a hybrid in the sense that it's part linebacker, part defensive line edge rusher, the spear is more part linebacker, part heavy nickel, part defensive back. So that's what we want to talk about there. And it's going to start with Aubrey Burks. And then we're going to continue this conversation there. But what comments might you have?
Well, first, I would like to thank our friends at Johnston Equipment for being a presenting sponsor of this podcast, this show we call In the Gun. Make sure you're checking out their newest location on Route 33, just outside of Weston. And Jed, this is where my kind of freshman to keep an eye on, impact true freshman, would come into play. I'm talking Zay Jennings, of course, the spear out of Cincinnati. He's another one of those. I mean, you talked about some of the things that Tyron Bradley did in high school. Similar for Zay Jennings, right? Was a quarterback, was a running back, played all over the place for his team. True athlete. He's got the body type that I think you want at a spear position, and particularly. Listen, this is maybe the low-hanging fruit because he was one of the highest-rated recruits, and there's been a lot of hype around Zay Jennings. I'm sure you'll have a little bit a deeper cut. You know, I'll play the hits, you play the deep cuts. All right, Jed. But one thing that kind of puts him over for the top for me as well too is he was an early enrollee in January, and I think that's always important to this conversation as well too. Those freshmen who just get in a few months early, get with Mike Joseph early. get the bearings of here's my dorm room and here's where I eat and here's where I'm going every day and class schedule and all that, and just get that college life to slow down a few months earlier than everybody else. I think that gives you a leg up as well too, a little bit of an advantage. So excited to hear your thoughts on all these guys. But Zay Jennings was my freshman spotlight here on this episode.
I do think he has an opportunity to be a high impact football player very early on for us. Another guy that it was really fun watching his high school tape. You talked about the versatility, but he just has this killer instinct to him. I would start the Zay Jennings conversation before we get into Aubrey Burks. I would start the Zay Jennings conversation with this. He has what I might consider to be the oldest attribute that can serve you well in the game of football. And I promise you, Wes, that in 1869, when Rutgers played Princeton, the first ever college football game, I don't know who the standouts were in that game, but I'll promise you they held the same quality. I'll promise you they held the same one-word quality that Zay Jennings says. Fearless. Zay Jennings is a fearless football player. He uses his body as a missile, as a projectile. He puts it in harm's way. He has no fear when he is flying toward the football to make a play and try and be disruptive. You've heard the coaching staff talk. He always seems to find his way around the football. We all remember the interception that he made in the spring game. That wasn't the only time he did that. If you were watching all the reps through spring ball, he's always around the football. He's starting to do some of that in camp as well already in 2024. So I expect him, again, it needs to slow down. He's full speed all the time. That's one thing Coach Rodriguez always used to say. I don't care if you make a mistake, but you better make it full speed. Well, Zay Jennings, all of his mistakes, I promise you, come full speed. And those are the mistakes you can live with. You can coach those. But as he learns the direction that he's always supposed to go, he is going to become an incredible weapon, an incredible asset. But even before that happens, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of contact. It's going to be a lot of the type of football that West Virginia fans appreciate. That blue collar, lower your shoulder, blow somebody up in a crowd. That's what Zay Jennings is all about. And he demonstrates the athleticism to hold his own in space, which is expected of that spear position. Again, if you're trying to envision what we're talking about, imagine there are going to be times with the ball on the hash, the left hash, the wide side being right for the offense, the right hash, the wide side being left. The spear is going to typically be asked to populate the wide side defensively against the offensive formations. They're going to be defending more space. So that's what Zay Jennings is going to do. He's listed as number 2 on the depth chart behind Aubrey Burks. Now, Aubrey Burks, kind of a Swiss Army knife for us. Talk about versatility, a guy who takes a lot of his reps at cat safety. Most of his career, until certain points last year, were spent on the back end. But with his knack as an edge rusher, we have spent more time moving him down to the spear position. But once again, he provides the versatility that if somebody wants to go heavy on us without changing personnel necessarily, you can move him from the slot back to the cat position without changing much up. Aubrey is the type of guy. First, he's physical. He's fearless as well. And he's a great open field tackler. When I see a perimeter screen coming to Aubrey's side of the field, it's almost always going to be snuffed out. I'm on the sideline smiling. You don't know what you're trying to throw that thing into. He's going to find a way to use his hands, shed the block. If I see him going downhill toward it, he's going to make the play.
Playing cat safety those 2 years really helped. The biggest difference, like I said, is just moving down at 5, and trying to get back in my drop. That's the biggest difference I've been having going through this fall camp, and that's something I got to work on to improve my game going through this camp, is when I'm at spear, dropping back to 10 to 12 because I'm already at 5. When I'm at cat, I only got to spin down 2 yards. You see the difference? So just those small things like that is probably what I got to remind myself of when I go on the field playing spear or playing cat.
Logged over 800 snaps for us defensively last year. 120 of those snaps were in the box. He loves playing a physical brand of football. Loves it. So loves contact, loves playing downhill. 174 of those were in the slot corner position, which is the spear we're talking about. So it's not foreign to him. Played a lot of it in the bowl game, repped it otherwise. He split time in the spring between the two positions. He did against North Carolina have a season-high number of snaps at spear in that game. He has this natural instinct and natural feel as an edge blitzer, which can really make things difficult for that tackle to that side. It really can. There's been times that Wyatt has even struggled in practice against him because he has that knack. And Wyatt, as you talked about, very likely first-round pick. Well, Aubrey's getting quality reps against a guy like that. And he's talked about the fact that, look, you have to understand there's different angles that I still have to master when I drop down over the slot as opposed to playing back deeper. The tight end's going to be on you faster. These big offensive linemen, when they pull, they're going to be on you faster. All of a sudden, things are happening almost instantaneously. You don't have as much time to pick your angles and use the grass and use the open space.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a different brand of football, but it's something that he's acclimating to. And I think his level of versatility, being able to bounce back and forth between those two positions, is going to give us a very unique weapon. And I'm excited about what he can bring because, once again, you heard Cody Alexander talk about the fact that when teams are running the stretch play, the outside zone, if they see a certain body type out to that wide nickel spot, to the wide side of the field, they see it as a soft edge. They're going to attack that soft edge because they see it as a liability in the defense. I'm not so sure that with a guy like Aubrey Burks, he's a liability as a run defender. He's going to set that edge, and he's going to make it difficult for you. So I think he brings a lot of value for us there. That's kind of what you're looking at topically with that spear position. And I think we've laid out pretty well the differences in these outside backer type positions, how drastically different they are, whether you're playing to the wide side or the short side, and the different skill sets and the different background that you might need to play those two very different positions, spear versus spur.
I think so. I think, I'm picking up what you're putting down. All right. So, yeah, I mean, those are very 21st century football terms, right? I mean, people think of a 3-4 traditionally, your edge rushers, your linebackers, and then you've got your two corners, your two safeties. I mean, this is football vernacular is always evolving, right? But particularly on the defensive side of the football over the last 5 years or so. So I do. I think it's good that you're taking the time to break all that down.
Here's how it happened, Wes. In 15 seconds, here's how it happened. Teams used to be at all levels of football very heavy 21 personnel, 2 backs and 1 tight end. So defenses would counter. If you were a 3-4 defense, you had 4 true linebackers on the field. But as offenses migrated into 11 personnel sets, and that became much more mainstream, and you had 1 back and 3 receivers and 1 tight end, all of a sudden defensively they had become more athletic. So that's where these hybrid body types started to enter the picture, and you started to get these nickel type bodies instead of true Sam backers. That's what happened with the game of football, and that's what West Virginia is doing defensively as well.
Correct. You had all these Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce dudes playing tight end, and you were like, my goodness, like we got to get some more athletes because our traditional linebackers can't run with these guys.
Yep, absolutely.
So where does that leave us? Sorry, we just chased the shiny silver object there for a second. Where were we again?
Back. Okay, we hit the D line, we hit the backers, the whole group. We fleshed them out in this 3-4 configuration. That leaves 4 spots. We're heading to the back end, baby.
That's right, secondary. All right, as we round this thing out.
Yeah, we're heading to the back end now. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the loss of Beanie Bishop and what he meant to this football team. There's a reason he's competing to be a starter with the Pittsburgh Steelers as an undrafted free agent, because his knack for playing the football in the air. West Virginia last year jumped from 21st in the country in passes defended, 121st. We were 121st 2 years ago and 21st last year. We jumped 100 spots in large measure because of Beanie Bishop. Now, Shadon Brown kind of has the knack and the inside baseball on how to coach that up as well. So that's what excites me about some of these personalities and faces and new guys that we're going to be talking about here as well. But that's what this is all about, playing the football in flight. That's where Beanie made the big difference. And when you look at this secondary being rebuilt or at least retooled, there's going to be different names that we're talking about in different spots. First of all, I want to talk about the Jackson twins. One's a safety, one is a corner. We really need them to flip a switch and bring it on, because those are the two, and I've seen flashes of it in practice from them. Those are the two that if those two step up and play to their ability and play to their potential, there's that P word again. Wow, you talk about super depth and versatility in this back end. You already have some element of it, but if those two are playing a high brand of football, that's going to bring all the more value. So That's kind of what I'm looking at from those two. Anthony Wilson has added some weight, added some strength. He's still an incredible tackler. He's worked on his ability as a pass defender. He was never really at Georgia Southern asked to do those types of things that he was asked to do last year. So I expect to see a lot of improvement in his game in that space back at the safety spot. Dantes Fagan, we're going to get into a handful of different transfers. He's the first that I'll mention. Not necessarily at a priority. I'm just kind of going through my notes here. But Dantes Fagan is a guy with a lot of speed, a ton of speed. But he wasn't really asked coming from Charlotte. When you listen to the staff talk and when you watch his tape at Charlotte, they didn't play a lot of zone concepts defensively. And there's a certain knack and feel for playing zone as opposed to just locking somebody up in man coverage and shadowing them across the field. We do play a lot of zone. So that's kind of what his learning curve is. He has the athleticism and speed to play true man, but he has to master some of the zone concepts. I think a guy with that kind of speed and that kind of skill set is going to help us and potentially even help us early. So that's a guy to keep your eye on as things progress early into the season. But let's jump to these corner spots. First, let's go to Garnett Hollis. Portal acquisition out of Northwestern. Long frame. He's listed at 6'1", 200 plus, about 201 pounds. Wes, when you stand next to Garnett Hollis, I think he might be a little taller than that. Maybe it's just my imagination. He just feels taller and longer than that even. He has kind of a Rasul Douglas, Daryl Worley long feel to him. You know, the NFL body type that you see playing on Sundays, his corner spots. He's built like a pro. He can really run. The majority of his snaps at Northwestern were at wide corner. He does have a good feel in zone. So that's, I think, one of the reasons he's going to be a good fit with what we're trying to do conceptually on the defensive side of the football. Here are a couple things to consider statistically, and what you see on tape with him at Northwestern backs this up. From a forced incompletion percentage standpoint, what percentage of passes thrown his way did he force an incompletion? 21%. Well, without a frame of reference, that doesn't mean anything until I tell you that was tied for highest among Big Ten cornerbacks with 250 plus coverage snaps. So very productive. Now, the thing about it is that comes with a downside. Very handsy, very physical football player. Was flagged 6 times, third among Big Ten corners. When I see the style of play that he brings, he reminds me of some of those longer Oklahoma State type corners that we faced through the years.
Justin
in the last
Gilbert.
handful of years. Jarek Bernard Converse, Rodarius Williams, Gilbert, those types of guys, you're right. He plays like that. So I'll promise you this, there aren't going to be a lot of uncontested catches come his way. He's going to be physical. He's going to force the issue. Sometimes he'll draw the flag. That's the nature of it. You got to push that envelope. And when you play that physical brand of football at that corner spot, that's part of it. Just understanding you're going to win more than you lose by playing that style of football. He's not afraid as a run defender to fly up and set the edge, so you like to see that. He had this forced fumble against Penn State where he was just like a missile downhill, forcing the edge, flying through the blocking assets. He's very physical as a run stopper on the goal line when you watch his tape. That's something else that stood out. I like the idea when you put him at the boundary corner spot. That's where, again, the nature of what offense is trying to do, that's where Beanie was last year. And that's why Beanie was targeted so much. The quarterback targets the shorter throw more than the wider, longer throw. It makes sense. Jimbo Fisher, we had a rule in the quarterback room. Shortest side, softest coverage. So if you're playing boundary corner, you're going to face a lot of targets. They're going to throw your way a lot because it's the shorter side of the field. So I can just imagine him holding up to that short side of the field with this physical brand of football, drawing a lot of targets. It's going to be worth the price of admission with Garnett Hollis. I mean, there's going to be a physicality to that side of the field and a lot of it and a lot of opportunities. So I'm very excited about what he brings. And then when I look at the other addition from Duquesne, this is a guy who jumped out on tape when we were watching the Duquesne tape last year going into that game. And that's, of course, Aiden Garnes. Aiden Garnes, Wes, has already put on about 15 pounds. Of muscle. That's one of the things that happens when you jump from an FCS program, an FCS nutrition program, an FCS weight room. I'm not knocking them. They just lack the resources that P4 has. So you're going to quickly put on muscle. You're going to quickly put on weight and size, and he's done that. He has long arms. He has a large radius. That's one of the things that makes him so difficult with the football in flight. He's added that weight. He's added that muscle. He stood out whenever you watched him on tape. This kid can really run. He's always around the football. He, too, is very versatile. He can play the post, but right now we're just asking him to focus on hold down that corner spot, and we'll kind of take it from there. He plays Wes bigger than he is. Again, when you watch it up close and personal in practice, I remember this from the spring, there's a certain physicality to his game, particularly against the run, that he doesn't play like he's 180 pounds. He brings it like there's a load behind it. So he's not afraid to lay some shots. He's twitchy. He's smart. He doesn't panic when he's in space. That's some of the things you see out of some defensive backs who struggle with the ball in flight. He doesn't panic with the football in the air when he's in space. He reacts well to it. He attacks the ball. If you're trying to make a catch or come down with a catch against him, you really better secure it all the way to the end, because he has that knack or that tendency or that penchant for fighting to dislodge the football all the way to the ground. So he's very good at that. He's very alert. He sees the field. I've already in Camp West seen him make more plays than he did in the spring. I mean, sometimes there's guys trying to, whether it's the deep crossing route, whether it's trying to do a double move, whatever the case might be, he's athletic. He reacts well. He responds well. He sees the ball. I think he's going to be a tremendous addition. And then continuing into the corner room, another guy, TJ Crandall. He's just young. TJ Crandall from Colorado State's just young. He's just untested, not a lot of reps in his career. He hasn't played a lot of football, but he is incredibly fast. He has blistering speed, elite speed. Colorado State, 300-plus snaps, but he's still young. Hamstring injury in the spring kind of impaired his development as a Mountaineer. So something's going to happen with him in that room. It's just a matter of what timeline we're looking at. And then Jaheim Joseph from Northwestern, Garnett Hollis, they were there together. Jaheim Joseph on the back end of the safety spot. He's very intelligent. He's very quick. He spent the spring learning our system. That's kind of one of the things that he was trying to master. And as things slow down for him, I think you'll see more quality from him as well. You want to get to the point where these safeties are interchangeable, and if one has to come off the field for a series, you don't really miss anything. Leading us into Kokoro Tarnu, another transfer from Jacksonville State. Kokoro Tarnu is a kid who played a lot of football at Jacksonville State, primarily at corner. Now, he did play some safety and some sub packages, but he's still trying to kind of master the angles of the position of safety. Was very good also with the ball in flight, was targeted 40 some odd times, only allowed a completion on 58%. Yards after catch. That's one of the things about Beanie Bishop last year that stuck out to me. I always looked at his very limited yards after catch. That's one of the things about Kokoro Tarnu. You might catch it in front of him, but you're not doing much with it after you do. He's going to get you to the grass. So that helps. If you go back and watch that Jacksonville State game against South Carolina at Williams-Brice Stadium, boy, they almost pulled that upset. If you remember how close that game was, it came down, they were driving at a pick six, but he played maybe his best football game against the Gamecocks in that game. If you watch him, like, they have some true track guys in the South Carolina receiving squad. Nick Harbor is one of the fastest guys in the history of the school. Well, they tried to hit Nick Harbor on a post, this big, long, 100-meter track guy. And Kokoro Tarnu was right there with him, stride for stride, running with SEC speed. So a lot to say there. Again, from a versatility standpoint, you want to reach a point where he mostly played wide corner, but he played some nickel, he played some safety. So maybe if pressed into it, he could play some corner here. But I think there's a lot of possibilities on this back end when you're looking at the interchangeable pieces and the cross-trained pieces. We talked about that on the defensive line. Some of those guys playing defensive end and boundary tackle, or playing boundary tackle and maybe some nose. We talked about it, the linebacker spots, and now we're talking about it on the back end as well. And that just makes you a better defense at large.
Yeah, it sure does. And I mean, this is the second straight year that we've kind of had some new prominent faces in the secondary that hadn't been with the program, for program type guys, portal guys, if you will. So that makes me feel more confident as well too about their ability to get these guys integrated and all on the same page quickly. And yeah, it's just, I mean, Jed, it's probably the best. I mean, it's probably the best I've felt about a WVU secondary heading into the season since Adai was still coaching it and Tyke Smith was, patrolling the back end. I mean, it's been a long time since I felt this good about a WVU secondary going into a year.
I mean, there's flashes. Back in 2020 when we led the nation in pass defense, became the first Big 12 defense to do so since Kansas State in the 90s, I think. back when we were doing that, college football was a different game. I mean, you weren't dealing with the portal. You weren't dealing with all these new faces and off-season acquisitions to the extent nearly that you are now.
Right.
So once again, we have to mention our guy. I mean, think of all the names in that conversation that came as an almost direct result of Drew Fabianich,
Big Drew,
the general manager for West Virginia football. So this is the Drew Fabianich time, right? I mean, all those new faces in that room. I mean, we just talked about Aiton guards, TJ Crandall, Garnett Hollis. Oh, I also have to mention, I went through this without even mentioning Jacoby Spells because he's been on the shelf with the injury. I'll tell you what, Jacoby, bigger, more physical. I think if you can get him and keep him healthy, he's going to be a solid factor in that corner room as well. The instincts have always been there. You think of the pick six against Virginia Tech his freshman year. So now it's just a matter with that new size, with that new strength. That strength is going to serve him well. Look, that's how you play high-level corner in a Power Four conference. You're going to have to be going stride for stride, arm in arm, with a 6'4", 230-pound wideout 40 yards downfield and not get banged around when the football's in the air. When you put on that weight and that muscle, you're able to hold your own. And that's what Jacoby Spells lacked in the past that I think he now has, that I think he's going to bring as well. But we talk about the new faces. We talk about the returners. I think we have a nice blend. Drew Fabianich has done a nice job this offseason with those acquisitions. From a player development standpoint, I think Mike Joseph, what he did with these kids in the offseason, a lot of these returning kids, you're going to see them playing their best brand of football on the defensive side as well. Hopefully it all comes together. There's reason for optimism on this side of the football.
Oh, there absolutely is. And I mean, again, a defensive unit that took a massive step forward last year. And I think you could argue has more talent on paper right now. So yeah, it's exciting. It absolutely is. And heck of a test coming up here in a couple weeks to get things going in that regard as well. You're not opening with Albany, boys. All right. I mean,
no, you're not. No, you're not. And it's, you hear the staff, the popular refrain, especially on the back end, is communication. I like the fact that Shadon Brown is the tip of the spear leading that room. Now you have one voice talking to all those defenders who populate that back end, not just safeties, but also corner. They speak the same language. So if you can limit the communication breakdowns and have fewer missed assignments. So often those big plays in the pass game come as a result of a missed assignment. Big plays in the run game come as a result of a missed fit. Big plays in the pass game come as often the result of a communication breakdown, which leads to a missed assignment. If you can shore that up and limit your missed assignments and really make the other team take the long way around and don't give them anything cheap and make them string out a drive and put 10, 12 plays together, keep them on the field, I think you're going to have some chances, especially if we can continue to ratchet things up, pressure the opposing passer, get to the quarterback, be disruptive, get them behind the sticks with these sacks and these TFLs, and hopefully downstream from that, get some turnovers and some short fields for the offense.
Yeah, it's all part of that ecosystem. And I mean, that ties into the offensive preview that we have available for you on ITG as well. You know, wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, the episode before this one. Football is an ecosystem, right? I mean, what your defense is doing affects your offense. What your offense is doing affects your defense. How your special teams is performing affects both units as well, too. Everything works together in tandem. So yeah, you need your offense to be winning their third downs, right? To keep your defense fresh and playing less snaps on the sideline. You need your defense to be winning on third down so you can get your offense back out there and wearing down the opposing defense and keeping your own fresh. So yeah, all things work in tandem, but I think that's a good outline of how, ideally this will play together.
Yeah, and I think a good way to close this out is let's spend a quick conversation on the special teams units. And then we can wrap this up because that kind of ties into putting a bow on the defense. But I like the fact we have returners in key spots. I like the fact that we have Michael Hayes back playing consistent football. Wes, when you look at what Michael Hayes did last year and combine that to what Casey Lake did in the two previous years, West Virginia's field goal success rate is the highest in the Big 12 over the last 3 years. We've hit 85% of our field goals in the last 3 years. So hopefully Michael Hayes can continue that. Ollie Straw, he's always been the sniper, dropping things inside the 20, inside the 10. Now I think he's got a little bit more leg strength to him. And from a kickoff standpoint, we talked about the issues with the coverage. So much of the offseason was spent addressing the kickoff coverage issues. West Virginia last year allowed 25 yards per kick return, worse than the Big 12. They allowed the most kick returns, most in the Big 12. When you have a productive offense, you're going to do that. Most yards on kickoff returns in the Big 12. First Big 12 team since 2012 to allow 3 kickoff returns for touchdowns, 2, as we know, in one game. Here's the good news. Jeff Kuntz, as the special teams coordinator, has spent the offseason through drill work almost every time he had kids together that populated these units, breaking it down into 3-man drills, 4-man drills to improve our coverage and transition units. And Neil Brown's first year here in 2019, we actually led the Big 12 in kickoff coverage. And Jeff Kuhn's first year here in 2020 as special teams coordinator, we led the Big 12 in kickoff coverage again. Now, one of the things that fascinates me that we need to focus on, and I'm so glad that it's on the coaching staff's radar. There was an issue with Michael Hayes' kickoffs last year, Wes. I don't know if you noticed, but down the stretch, he was kicking off with a tired leg. And here's what I mean by that. Through the first 8 games of the season, 42% of his kicks were a touchback. Through the first 8 games. Now, games 9 through 13, it wasn't 42%. It dropped to 7%. So 7%. He had none against BYU, 1 against Oklahoma, none against Cincinnati and Baylor. In the bowl game, he struggled. So we have to keep his leg fresher down the stretch. Fresher leg, more productive coverage on those units. I think the drill work in the offseason will do that. I love the fact that Austin Brinkman's back is, I think, the best long snapper in the entire country. So there's a lot to build on from a special teams and transition unit. Preston Fox, I think, is sneaky good as a punt returner. Mm-hmm. If he gets some opportunities, let's see, we have some athletes that might be candidates as kickoff returners. So I think that's a good way to close this defensive episode, is a little bit of talk about the special teams units.
Yeah, the third side of the football deserves some love too, that's for sure. And you often don't think about those guys until it's Houston and there's a big kickoff return that changes the game, until it's Baylor and there's, until it's Baylor 2 years ago, right? Where blocking field goals and making field goals ends up being the difference. TCU blocking a field goal at the death last year.
At the end of the game. Yep. We played a field position brand of football, Wes. And when you play field position brand of football, in other words, when you're trying to win the starting position, I mean, I tracked each week where our starting position was versus the opposition. And trust me when I say it served us very well to win the starting field position battle last year. Only 6% of our offensive snaps were taken inside our own 20. That was the fewest in the entire new Big 12. That's because we were playing, and that's despite our issues on kickoff coverage. Think about that. That's really a neat trick. Despite all these shortcomings on kickoff coverage and all these struggles, we still very rarely got pinned offensively because we were playing the field position game so well. Neil Brown sees the big picture. He understands offensively. Sometimes you just got to get a couple first downs and punt. Sometimes you got to tilt the field in your favor. He feels the game out and gets a pretty good beat on what type of game you're involved in by midway through the second quarter. And these transition units play a critical and prominent role in that field position battle from a hidden yardage standpoint.
And that is the difference between winning and losing, particularly in a conference like the Big 12 that has the most one-score games of any conference in college football, nearly 50%. I think it's like 44 point something. So about 45% of the Big 12 games, essentially half, pretty darn close, are one-score games. That's the highest percentage of any conference in the country. So, yeah, you got to have that field position battle.
Yeah, it's like 46%. Great point on your part that came out this week in an ESPN article. It made me go look some things up. We're 13-7. We won 65% of our games under Neil Brown in one-possession games. But here's what's interesting about that. We started off 7-6. We didn't know how to win those close games, but we've now won 6 of our last 7 one-possession games. That's the sign of a program that has turned the corner culturally. When you start to believe in the other guy that you can win those type of games down the stretch, and the guy next to you is just as likely as you are to make the play. We're 6-1 in our last 7 one-possession games after under Neil Brown starting 7-6. That is a very, positive sign, as you touched on, in a league with such parity that plays so many of those types of football games.
There's teams that are uncomfortable in those situations and teams that are very comfortable in those situations, and hopefully 6-1 in their last 7, that continues, because that's one of those things that serves you very well. So this was a lot of fun. A big breakdown here as we continue with our kind of August previews. Reminder, episode 179, the one just before this, the offensive side of the football. There's a full breakdown on Garrett Green, 2-part episode, nearly 3 hours of Garrett Green talk in total. So listen, if you're a Mountaineer junkie looking for your fix, all right, I mean, there's no reason that you should be looking for anything more here than what we've got for you in the last couple weeks on ITG, because we have got the scratch for your itch as we get closer and closer to kickoff, big noon against Penn State at the end of the month. But that will do it for this edition of In the Gun. Big thank you to our guy Skyler for putting this together for us, as always. For the Runaway Beer Truck Owen Schmidt, the Signal Caller Jed Drenning, I'm Wes Euler, and the one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. Take care. We'll talk to you soon. You've been In the Gun.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over.